What would you do if you were on the brink of participating in the Olympics and just months before circumstances prevented that from happening? Today, we have the privilege of hearing from Vilis Ozols, a former member of the Canadian national volleyball team, pro beach volleyball tour competitor, and former NCAA women's volleyball coach. Vilis is the author of 3 books: Motivational Leaders, Grand Stories, and Motivational Selling. His diverse career spans over 30 years, during which he excelled in leadership roles in sales, customer service, marketing, and corporate training. A very diverse background. Above all, Vilis takes pride in his family, participating in raising his 4 children, which 2 of them he adopted from Eastern Europe. So we're thrilled to welcome Vilis today. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Well, between being an athlete, a professional speaker, and also an NCAA coach, all these years, tell me more about your adversity journey and your takeaways going through some of those challenges. What helped you be unstoppable?
Thank you for that intro, Danielle. That was awesome. And it's interesting, having a diverse background. I think most people tend to fall back on one thing that they've done. And I think I've been fortunate enough that I tend to maybe try and combine a bunch of those backgrounds. I do fall back on having been an athlete, but let's face it, I'm old and telling sports stories from when I was a youngster or in better shape kind of sounds like your parents when they tell you about how they walk to school back and forth in snowstorms kind of thing. But yeah, I do fall back on my athletic background, the having played professionally, you learn stuff. And then having coached, I think the biggest thing that happened when you become a coach is it's no longer about can you do it or did you do it? It's getting someone else to do it. It can be frustrating. It is an entire different skill set. And then what you find is that you really, at least I found that I would fall back on every little bit that I could in terms of how I could help my athletes, the young ladies to just be as good as they possibly could.
Now, I have a question here because we're talking about adversity and we're talking about challenges. Tell me a little bit. You were on the brinks of going to the Olympics, but you said something happened. What was that?
Yeah. Yeah, that's it was years ago. So I'll take you back. So this was back in the 80s, and I was on the Canadian junior national volleyball team, and the Canadian team had qualified for the 1980 Olympics. I was still on the junior national team at that point in time, but I don't know if you remember, but we boycotted the 1980 Olympics. That was the one that when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, everyone knows the US didn't go, but either did Canada. So I stayed up in Canada. I had scholarship offers in the US, but stayed up there. And so now I'm getting ready for the 84 Olympics. I'm with the training squad. I'm one of the top players in the world. And then just prior to the signing of the IOC roster, the one that says you get to go, I was coming down from a block in a practice match and blew out my ankle, tore all the ligaments. And I don't know if you could picture or imagine just in a split second knowing that everything you've worked for up to that point in your life just isn't going to happen. And they do some weird stuff or weird testing at the national team level. We were like human guinea pigs. And one of the unique things that they had done is they tested us for pain tolerance testing. And that's another story for another time. But one of the unique things is I actually was tested and I had the highest pain tolerance level of anybody on the volleyball team. But I can honestly tell you when that ankle went, I felt the most incredible pain that you could possibly even begin to imagine. And it had nothing to do with the physical pain of the ankle going. I can take that. But just the idea that knowing that what you worked for just isn't going to happen. And
That must have been devastating.
oh, it was, and it's got worse because I ended up going to the Olympics anyways, so as a spectator, so I watched my
Oh,
team. They made it to the medal round, so now we're the final 4 at the Olympics, and I'm watching, and we lose the semifinal match to the US. US goes on and wins the gold. Then we lose the bronze medal match to Italy, and I had some really dear friends on the US team, so that night, they've won the gold medal, and I'm literally partying with them and touching their gold medal, and you'd think it would be the coolest thing in the world, and it wasn't. It was possibly the lowest point in my life. And you ask, so how does that all play? Yeah, it's a sports story and it's from years ago, but it set the foundations of everything that I've done since then. And I struggled. I honestly struggled. And I think having gone through that struggle really helps me in terms of both working with my athletes because they go through adversity, they go through injuries, or even in a business environment. We tend to look at people and look at how successful they are, but most people who've accomplished anything, they've overcome adversity in one form or another. I know you've had your share, and I know that that's part of your secret to success because you just keep moving forward.
Now, I have two questions, but I
Okay.
kind of want to go back a little bit here because I'm just curious. I really want to understand the picture of where you were at when it comes to that moment when you realized you weren't going to be able to go. And that being, how many hours a week did you train
Oh
when
my
you were
gosh,
preparing for the Olympics?
it was off the charts, and it was like, as a coach now, we would have never have trained as hard as we did back then. We were doing 2 a day, so 3 hours twice a day plus weights every single day. And I remember that's pretty serious. And obviously there'd be highs and lows to that, but that was pretty standard and we worked very hard. So you can just imagine.
So let's put this in perspective. And I know this is a different perspective, but just kind of slightly a twist here. That would be, I come from a sales background, and I know that a lot of my listeners are in sales. That would be at the end of the year, you are, and I have had somebody on my team experience this, 0.7% away from achieving President's Club Sales Excellence Award. You are right there about to go on that lavish trip. And for us, the company that I worked for, they spent about $20,000 per couple to go on these lavish trips. It was absolutely worth it. I've been on one. But could you imagine, just, I know you can, but for our listeners, to be 0.7% away from hitting sales excellence, President's Club, the bonus, the trip, the recognition? I'd imagine it'd be slightly like that because you're working all year for it, but you had been working a lifetime to go to the Olympics.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy. And I sometimes feel like my experience pales in comparison to, let's say, like you said, somebody who their living or their success from a business standpoint basically follows that same trajectory, or where they get close, but they don't get close, they don't make it. And it's really interesting because it's part of what I teach and what I preach, whether it's to my athletes or whether it's a business seminar. And I went through, like we talked about, the greatest lows that you can imagine. And I've said this to my athletes, the only way I can live with myself is knowing that all those times that I was training is I did everything I possibly could. You want to give it kind of a moniker or a phrase, is it was basically, it was maximum effort. I knew that I gave 100%. And looking back, the only way I can live with myself is knowing that I couldn't have worked any harder. And I guess if there's some takeaway that is a learning point, whether it's in a business environment, a sports environment, whether it's parenting, is did you give it everything you had? And then if you happen to not fail or not make it, you can rest on that. And that's kept me sane, literally sane, all these years, knowing how close you get and maybe not getting there.
That is an excellent point because I rather, at the end of the day, if I don't achieve a particular goal, I rather look back and reflect that knowing that I had tried everything that I possibly could than to just give up and always wonder what if. And that's actually when I started my business. I remember looking at my husband one day and saying, I think I want to start this business, or I think I want to write a book. And I remember this moment when he looked at me and he said, you know what? He said, I think you should do it because if you don't, you're always going to wonder what if, and you never want to live your life like that. And I thought it was such sound advice. And so anytime I'm thinking about taking a risk, I'm going, okay, this is a time to do it, stretch me out of my comfort zone because I don't want to wonder what if, knowing that I rather fail trying and look back and know that I tried than to just never do it at all and never know.
Oh, you're triggering so many thoughts and so many lessons that I hope, if I'm even mildly successful, that I can teach my athletes. But one of them, a favorite story I like to tell is, I don't know if you've ever heard of a coach. He was a basketball coach named Jimmy Valvano, or Jimmy V. He was one of the most unexpected coaches to win the NCAA basketball tournament. And then he died tragically of brain cancer. And days before he passed away, he went on ESPN and gave this speech about never giving up. And it's like he's an icon. And every year they have the Jimmy V Foundation, and it's a fundraising for cancer research. But my first experience with Jimmy V was when they actually won the championship. They were one of the last teams to make it into the tournament. They're not expected to make any noise or to do anything. And then they become one of those bracket busters. They just start winning and beating teams, overtime win, a last second basket. And to the point where they get to the final game and they're just this prohibitive underdog, and they're playing the University of Houston that sent all 5 starters to the NBA, and they didn't stand a chance. And when it got to the end of the game with like 2-3 seconds left, they're they're down by 1 point, and then they sink a miraculous last second basket to win the championship. And whenever they show the March Madness, they always show this picture of Jimmy V running around the court looking for somebody to hug because everybody's taken. They're all on the floor, they're wandering around. And that's the iconic moment that they always show on TV whenever there's like a college basketball game. But what I remember is I was watching the game on TV and I saw the interview afterwards. And the interviewer asked Jimmy Valvano, they said, well, how did you motivate your kids when you knew you didn't have a chance of winning? And Jimmy V looked at the reporter like they were from another planet and just said, I don't understand. Like, are you suggesting that if you promise a kid they're going to win, that's going to motivate them? He says, so if you're really asking me what I promised them or what I said to them, here's what I said. I said, with all of your hard work, with your effort, sticking to the system, with your attitude, I guarantee you, if you're looking for a guarantee, I guarantee you'll be in a position to win. Nobody can promise what's going to be on at the end. And that to me is one of the best definitions of success I've ever come across. And it's a little bit of what you were talking about is you put yourself in a position to win, you start your business, you take a risk. And if you don't get it, you at least have A, hopefully done 100% maximum effort. And then B, you put yourself in a position to win or to take advantage of the opportunities. And that sounds exactly like what you went through.
Put yourself in a position to win.
Yeah. And then the other thing, I'm really big on, obviously, I like to get into the details and give people usable stuff they can use, but I've always been a huge advocate of what I call values-based decision making. I got to work with the Disney Corp many years ago with their Imagineering group, and there was this amazing quote in their facility, but it was Walt Disney, and everyone can remember the Walt Disney quote that says, if you can dream it, you can do it. But this one really resonated with me, and what the Walt Disney quote was, is when your values are clear, your decision making is easy. And that to me becomes a foundation of coaching, whether it's coaching athletes, whether it's coaching business leaders, is if you can share or if you have a clear common understanding of what's really important, they'll figure out a way to make it happen. And so that to me was always really critical. And so, when I look at those foundational values, 1 is moving forward, 2 is maximum effort, 3 is moving forward. So that's one that I've always put yourself in a position to win. But the moving forward, when in playing defense, one of the things that tends to happen is people tend to plant themselves. They put their heels down, they stand there. And then if the shot is deflected, the spike or the tip, then they can't move. And so one of the secrets to being a great defensive player is to always be moving forward, even when somebody's smacking a ball at you as hard as they can. And that is one of those values of maximum effort, position to win, and then always moving forward. And, you can use whatever words you want. Is it continuous development, lifelong learner, but always moving forward is to me one of those foundational values.
Now, do you believe that you've always been a motivated person? Is this something that you've been wired to always move forward, or is there something more to it?
I think there is. I tend to use a lot of analogies. So when I first got into speaking and training, I used to do what was called TQM training, total quality management. And one of the fathers of TQM was a guy named Dr. W. Edwards Deming. And he was this quality guru that went over to Japan after World War II and helped rebuild Japan. And he's not as well known here in the US, but in Japan, he's revered as a public figure. He's largely seen as the foundation of their economic rise to success. And he has his 10 points and he helped some of the big auto companies and things of that sort. But he had a rule that's kind of buried in some of his work called the 85-15 rule. And what it basically said is that in any organization, when stuff isn't working, said most 85% of the time, the question you should be asking is, what is the issue? And only 15% of the time is the question, who should be the issue? And what tends to happen in a business environment is we tend to focus on who is the so-and-so not doing what they're supposed to do. It's like that old situation, manager walks up to an employee and taps him on the shoulder and says, how come you're not working? Employee turns around and says, didn't see you coming. So it's just all that. Is it the people? And what I really believe when we start talking about motivating or when we start talking about goal setting is it really comes down to what you're doing, not are you motivated? And I think you were talking about being a motivational speaker or trying to motivate people. I really believe that it's the what that really helps people with their motivation. And it's not, are you genuinely motivated? That's that 15%. And so to answer your question, even if you've got that 15%, is that going to be enough if you don't have the skills? And I think that's really critical.
this conversation is very much in line with the conversation that I had the other day. I have a friend and I were, she messaged me and she said, I'm really sorry I'm late to getting back to you. I've been burning the candle at both ends, and she's explaining everything that she's doing. And then she messages me back and then she goes, well, I realize that you're messaging me at midnight and you're up at 6 a.m. So clearly you're burning the candle at both ends. And I thought about it for a second and I haven't responded yet, but I was thinking, I don't feel like I'm burning the candle at both ends. And it goes back to what we're talking about here, which is every decision that I'm making is in alignment with my values. I don't work for somebody. Everything that I'm doing is for my own business and for the clients that I serve. And I have been working a lot of hours lately because I'm in the peak of my book launch, but it doesn't feel that way because I truly love what I do. I am working more now than I did when I was in corporate, but it feels like one big hobby. That's how passionate I am about it.
Well, and what's really neat when I hear you telling your story is all the three things we talked about: putting yourself in a position to win, moving forward, and maximum effort. All of those fit in. And I think the key there is passion. Is if you love what you do, if you can find something you love, it's like that old saying, you do what you love and the money will follow. And if you're doing what you love, you never really work another day in your life.
Absolutely true. I remember there was a period at my point where I first started, and it was coming from a scarcity mindset. I've got to make money. And I was kind of making my decisions based off of that. When I truly let go of the money and started making my decisions based off of one core value, which is how can I make impact? That is my guiding light for any decision that I'm making. And is based off of, will this make an impact, a positive impact on somebody's life? And sometimes it's a podcast where maybe they're not going to work with me directly, but this is a way of making an impact and serving people. Maybe it's through speaking, maybe it's through writing a book or coaching or leading a training, but ultimately it comes down to that one word. And when you have alignment on the decisions that you're making based off of one of your core values, you're happier. You don't feel as burned out, because burnout is a result of having lack of passion on tasks that you're doing, and you're doing it over and over again. This is really, like you said, is in alignment with your values.
Yeah, you're obviously on your true path, and it just shows. It shows in your enthusiasm. And I think you said it really well. You want to have a benefit for the recipient, whether it's a podcast viewer or whether it's an audience member in a live presentation. But I think you've hit on the secret, and that is providing a benefit to that person.
Mhm. Well, thank you. Now, okay, so let's dig into goals a little bit, because we've talked about motivation. We've talked about where motivation, the source of motivation, where it comes from. But let's talk now about goals, because there is a stat out there. Sometimes the number wavers depending on the source, but they say on average about 87% of people give up on their New Year's resolutions by the second week of February. And that's actually strategically why my book is launching February 21st, is because I thought it'd be exactly the time that people are needing that motivation to get back in on achieving their goals and reevaluating them. So let's talk about, how does motivation tie to goal setting?
Oh, it's interesting. I think it's a timely question, and I love that you're timing it for when many New Year's resolutions fall through. I had a fun experience that I've tied to goal setting that addresses some of the research. Like, there's many reasons why we fall flat on our goal setting. Part of it is procrastination, part of it is fear of failure, part of it is we feel unworthy. And there's a lot of research, but there's no definitive one answer. And so I think some of the important things when you talk about goal setting come down to removing some of the barriers. And so I'll share a quick experience. I lived in Colorado most of my life, 25 years. And when I first moved there, my neighbors had suggested that we go technical, like mountain climbing. And without really thinking, I said yes. And then, of course, you get the heebie-jeebies, like, what the heck am I going to be doing on the edge of a mountain? And so the very first thing I did, because there was such a barrier between doing this. And so for me, the secret was, and the term I use is remove the veil. One of the reasons that we tend not to accomplish goals is we don't know what we need to do. And then there's all this research that, particularly the scope of a project, if for you to be successful, you have to do more than 7 items. The human brain, the short-term memory can conceptualize 7 items. Once you go beyond that, it becomes this cloud, this nebulous cloud, and it creates a real source of procrastination. And so the first thing that I highly recommend is just to remove that veil. And that is, do research, read a book, go on the web. YouTube is your friend. YouTube will teach you anything under the sky. And so what you're doing is you're removing that veil. And when there's a veil between you and your goal, the odds of you jumping on board are much lower. But once you start doing your research and getting the information, it all becomes much less intimidating. And so I learned words like rappelling and belaying and emergency rescue helicopters and all the really important stuff. But then the day before we were supposed to go climbing, my friends take me out to a place just outside of Boulder, Colorado called the Monkey Rocks. And so we go technical climbing, but we're not tied in with anything. So you're on a sheer cliff. And it was amazing how difficult it was. You're hanging by your fingertips. And I remember at one point you're learning your balance and you're against this sheer cliff. And I remember at one point there were all these muscles that I didn't know I had. And in my case, I didn't have them. And so I realized that I'm going to fall. And so then you just jump off because you're only this high off the ground. So you're on a cliff, but you're traversing side by side. So one of the things that I highly recommend when we apply that to our own goal setting is find your monkey rocks. And that is, you don't have to do everything all at once. Maybe it's volunteering if there's something you want to do, or maybe it's joining an organization or having a mentor, is getting some way to try and go full speed with what you want to do, but not laying it all out on the line. And I'm sure, you've had your own version of monkey rocks. There's associations, there's mentors, there's asking for help. And one of the interesting things is I think most high performers are not good at asking for help. I see that in dealing with my NCAA athletes. And so we really try to build in that mentality of, your coaching staff, your teammates, everyone's here to help you. And part of being an elite athlete is learning to ask for help. And so that's second step. And then the third piece of the whole climbing metaphor is, the day comes and we do this climb, and we were climbing just outside of Boulder, Colorado. There's a rock formation called the Third Flatirons, and it's one of the most beautiful and exhilarating beginner climbs. And it really was quite easy. It was like climbing a ladder, handholds, footholds are always there. We're tied in, so safety was a big deal. But when you get to the very top of this Third Flatiron, instead of hiking down, most people don't realize this, is that there's more injuries going down the mountain than there are going up. So what they do is they tie off a rope at the top of the mountain, and there's an overhang. And so the hardest thing I ever had to do was, you're standing on top of this cliff. You can see Denver 30 miles away. You're that high up. And then you lower yourself off a rappelling line down the 30 yards or whatever to the bottom. And it was the most difficult thing I've ever done. And so I don't know if you can imagine, I don't know if you can picture what you would feel when you finally get to the bottom. So you finally lean over, you're leaning over nothingness, you get to the bottom. What do you think you feel?
Relief that I'm on solid ground.
I know that's what you would think. And that's what I thought I would feel. But I would say that what I felt was pure exhilaration and motivation. If I had been interviewed at that point in time, I would have sounded like a puppy on steroids. I'm going to do that again. I can conquer the world. I'm going to do anything. And it was just this intense, immense sense of accomplishment. And I guess if there's one thing that I would recommend when we talk about goal setting and putting that into context, is transpose the feeling you would have had at the top, the fear of letting go, the fear of counting on the rope, the fear of going down, with how are you going to feel when it's all said and done? What is the end result? Why are you doing it? It's tapping into your why. I remember, and I know many people have done this, but trying to go to school while you're working full time. That was one of the hardest things I've ever done. You're raising
I worked
kids.
2 jobs while going to college. It was not fun.
Exactly. Late nights and so many priorities, things are screaming at you. And I remember as I'm going through all these late nights, is just the thought that kind of carried me through was that thought of walking across the stage with the pomp and circumstance playing in the background, da, 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 and knowing that my kids and my wife are in the audience and they're going to see me go across. And so I think what we need are what I would call either like an emotional anchor. What is it that's going to carry you through the hard work? Because all the best laid plans still come down to hard work. And so replace that fear and trepidation with how are you going to feel at the end?
When I was in school and I was thinking about graduating, I was getting my bachelor's degree. I had a day job and then I would go straight to my night job. And all I wanted was that why. That why was all I get to do once I graduate is just have one big job. That's it. Not 2 jobs and school. It was as though I just got to focus on work and not everything else. It almost felt like I had better balance in my life when I got to go to work. So, and ironically, I didn't even walk at my graduation. My graduation was over Memorial Day weekend and I didn't want to sit in 90-degree weather in the heat wearing a black gown. I said, no, I'm going to go to the river and go have some fun.
Oh, But yeah, I think it's, the other thing is, and there's so many different examples you could use, like just having those letters behind your name now. Now you're a BA or an MBA or a whatever. And that's, you work hard, you put that maximum effort in, but it's something that stays with you for life.
Absolutely. I work with a lot of sales representatives, and a lot of times they're looking for a job, and there's some people that have degrees and some people that don't have degrees. And I would never force someone to choose one direction over another. You get to choose what works best for you. But what I will always say is if you have a degree, it's going to open up more doors. It just will open up more doors, because there are a lot of organizations, specifically in medical sales, that will only hire people if they have a degree. And I worked for an organization that was one of them. And I remember that there was somebody on my team that didn't have a degree, and we had acquired the company. So she was grandfathered in, but she was never going to get promoted. And it became very frustrating to her. She felt very stuck in where she was at unless she went and got a degree. So it just opens up more doors. But when you talk about having that why, in my book, I give a framework on goal setting, and it's called the Cobo framework, but it's very tied to the why. So the first step is, what's your courageous goal? What is something that is a big goal that you want to achieve? You're going to get out of your comfort zone. You're going to lean into that fear. You're going to lean into the unknown. What is that courageous goal? Second step is, what are the objective steps that you're going to take to achieve that goal? As you said, it's these little steps that do a ripple effect of getting to the goal over time. So that could be, you want to get promoted. It could be updating your resume, updating your LinkedIn profile. You want to achieve a particular sales goal. It could be reevaluating your territory. Where's your new business? Where's your existing business? Where are some areas that you can grow? It could be just little things, reading a book every single week. For me, I spend an hour a day on personal development, whether it's listening to a podcast, reading a book, but I dedicate an hour a day. So I'm constantly learning. And then the next step is B, which is benchmark. How are you going to benchmark and monitor the progress of your goal? Because a lot of times we'll look at a big lofty goal and a courageous goal, and we'll say, I don't know how I'm going to achieve that. But when you break it down into particular small little steps and you start to monitor your progress along the way, then you get to celebrate the progress and it becomes a lot more attainable. And then the last one, and this is the most important, is the O, which is opportunities. What opportunities are going to open up for you when you achieve that goal? So if one of the goals was to go back to school and get a degree because you know that's going to help advance what would the opportunity be? It's going to advance your career. That's the why. And that's the Cobo framework that I share in the book. In addition, it's supported by a couple other frameworks that go into goal setting, but it's definitely one of the ones that I believe has helped me through the years and staying focused on what goals I wanted to achieve.
Well, it's obvious you've got some, amazing foundations there. And I think anybody who would follow those steps, they're on the right track. So good for you for sharing all that.
Thank you. Well, you've shared so many nuggets of wisdom today. I don't even know where to begin because you've shared so much is valuable. But I would say, what would be, if we were to wrap up our conversation today, what are 3 words of wisdom that you would share with our listeners?
Wow. I don't know if I'd narrow it down to 3, but I'll share kind of maybe my one last sports volleyball story.
Yes.
And so I'm about 6'3" tall. So you wouldn't think of me as being a particularly short person. But when I played for Canada, I was the shortest player on the team. And so the only way I would even see the court, like get on the floor, was, when it was 13-13 and we needed an extra defensive play to win the point or to win the side out, and so that was my role. And I remember the first time I ever had gone to a volleyball clinic, the guy that was teaching the clinic was on the national team. He had played in the 76 Olympics. And I was kind of a brash young athlete saying, well, I'm going to play in the Olympics. And he took it so seriously. And he said, well, then you need to know the secret. And of course, I'm thinking, well, yeah. And so he said, well, here's the secret. He says, at your size, he says, you're going to have to become an amazing defensive specialist. And he said, the secret is this, is that the only ball you can't get is the one you don't go after. And it made so much sense to me, and it became who I was. So from that point on, I went after everything, and I'd have bruises and cuts, and you need a little bit of skills to go with the motivation, but I was one motivated athlete. And I guess if I could leave you and the audience with one last point, is to maybe carry a little bit of that volleyball player mentality with you, is that the only goal you can't accomplish is the one you don't go after. We have an amazing ability as people to accomplish our goals once we set our sights on them and make it happen. And I mean it sincerely when I say I wish you the best of luck, because one of the foundations of all of my coaching was always this, and that is luck favors momentum. And so go after your goals, the momentum will follow, and you'll get there.
So what are you going after? listeners, what's that ball that you're going to be going after today? What's your why? How is that aligned in helping you achieve your goals? Because if there's so much to take away from this episode, I think this is actually going to be an episode I'm going to listen to a couple times throughout the year, because this is the one to listen to help us be that elite in achieving our goals. No matter what time of year it is, we are not giving up. We are staying motivated. We are moving forward. We are going to be in alignment with our values and our why. And we are going to go after every single ball that is out there. And we are going to think and play like a professional volleyball player. Thanks for tuning in. And until next week, be unstoppable.